To the August 9th meeting of the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission is composed of 9 residents of Troy who have been appointed by the mayor and approved by City Council for terms of up to 3 years. On tonight's agenda, we have a couple of special use requests with preliminary site approvals. And with that, Mr. Nick. Here.
Mr. Krent?
Here.
Mr. Maxwell?
Here.
Mr. Zanzika?
Here.
Mr. Schultz?
Here.
Mr. Stratt? Here.
Mr.
Mr. Tagle?
Here.
Mr. Allman?
All right, so we have a quorum. Next on the agenda is the approval of the agenda.
Move to approve.
Mr. Edmonds moves in favor, and second Mr. Stratt. Any discussion? Vote on the motion, please.
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Mr. Maxwell?
Yes.
Mr. Zanzika?
Yes.
Mr. Stratt?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Allman?
Yes.
Mr. Edmonds?
Yes.
All right, motion passes. Next is the approval of the minutes of the July 26, 2011 special study meeting. Any additions or comments on that, on those minutes?
So move, Mr. Chairman.
Moved by Mr. Zanzika, as stated, and second Mr. Tagle. Vote on the motion, please.
Mr. Maxwell?
Yes.
Mr. Zanzika?
Yes.
Mr. Stratt?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Allman?
Yes.
Mr. Edmonds?
Yes.
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Motion passes. Next is time for public comment for any item that is not on tonight's agenda. Is there anyone here wishing to speak on an item or matter which is not on tonight's agenda? All right, seeing no one, we will close public comment and go to item 5, which is a public hearing and special use request and preliminary site plan review for the proposed Holiday Inn Express Hotel and Suites, east side of Stevenson Highway, north of 14 Mile, 466 Stevenson Highway, Section 35, currently zoned OM Office Mixed Use District. Mr. Brannigan, you going to take this one?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Maxwell. Tonight we don't have the benefit of a PowerPoint. As you know, Brent is on vacation this week, and so we're just going to use go straight from the agenda, straight from my letters, and then with the aerial photos and the applicant's materials. So what I'm going to have on the big screen and available for the viewers at home, and that is what the planning commissioners actually have on their desktop. So. At any rate, this is a special use request. This is for the project that you are familiar with. This is the Holiday Inn Express Hotels and Suites on Stevenson Highway. We reviewed just a couple of months ago the rezoning request that was approved by City Council to move this site to OM Office Mixed Use District, specifically for the purpose of permitting as a special use a lodging institution like this one. So this is the special use and site plan that's coming afterwards. If you don't remember, the location's on the east side of Stevenson Highway, just north of 14 Mile Road. There's a couple of large office complexes on either side, and it's basically the rear faces the freeway. The site is a decent size. It's about 3.39 acres in area. It's surrounded by a mix of OM zoning to the north, RC to the south, OM to the east, and IB, which is our integrated industrial business, across Stevenson to the west. The proposed building, and I'll jump over to the site plan in a minute, the proposed building is right in the middle of the property, more or less, sort of a north-south orientation with its front facing Stevenson, its rear facing the freeway, but you'll see when we get into the architecture what it kind of looks like. But the main entrance is facing Stevenson Highway. There's a couple of provisions in the zoning ordinance that are going to apply here, particularly parking location. Area width, height, and setback. Section 417C establishes dimensional requirements now in the ordinance for this particular district, the OM district, and they're a little bit different than they used to be, so I'm going to go through them really quick. Right now, the new OM district only requires a 10-foot front yard setback. This is not like our form-based code districts where it's a required building line. This is just a minimum setback of 10 feet. They greatly exceed that, 170 feet about, more or less. Rear yard setback is 30 feet. They exceed that by over 100 feet. The sides to the north, they're right near the 20-foot minimum setback requirement. To the south, they have 3 times as much setback as required, nearly 70 feet. Maximum height is 5 stories and 75 feet in this district. The building proposed is 4 stories and 58 feet. Lot coverage, the maximum is a 40% maximum. That's the buildings. While that actual calculation was not provided on the plan, it's very clear that they meet that. But one of the things I would say for final is that the actual percentage lot calculation be shown in their site table, their data table that they do have on the plan. It's just an informational requirement. I have every confidence that they satisfy that requirement by a long shot. They've got plenty of area. Open space requirement, they have nearly 40%, nearly double what is required under the ordinance. So they meet all the area bulk height requirements of the ordinance. Proposed parking, the plan includes 128 total spaces located throughout the site. They're distributed evenly in front of and behind the building line. Not to be confused with the required building line. As you know, the building line in the zoning ordinance is that line where the front part of the building basically is. So, you know, if you, even if it's well beyond the setback or encroaching into a setback, whatever, it's that line of the building basically cut across the property. So what the requirements of the ordinance say now is that in cases like this, in the OM district, half the parking needs to be behind that line, half the parking can be in front of that line. No more than half the parking can be in front of that line. In this case, the main chunk of the building is a little bit further back, but the building line actually rests where in this case, the westernmost part of the building is, which is the structural canopy that they have over top, like their carport, like you'd see typical of a lot of hotels like this. So the building line starts right there. I say this because there are a few spaces that are sort of situated along the front of the building, which could be perceived as being on that side of the building, but they actually are behind the building line, which meets that canopy. So I'm confident that they meet the 50-50 allotment that they're required to have. So there's 128 spaces with 6 barrier-free. The requirements are as such: they have 1 space for each guest room, 1 space per 1 employee on the largest typical shift, plus any additional spaces required for dining, which are calculated separately. There is no formal separate dining establishment here. They do have a grand room and a lobby, and I believe they have like continental breakfast and stuff, but we don't consider that a dining establishment. It doesn't meet the requirements for a dining establishment. It's not a restaurant, so it doesn't need to be parked separately. So they only need the 128 spaces, and that is what they provide. In terms of site access, they have a single drive to the west and a cross-access drive to the south. We don't have any objection to that approach. We do need to have, you know, the paperwork for the cross-access easement prior to final site plan approval, but that can be an administrative thing and should have no bearing on your consideration. They do show that there'd be an easement there. There's an existing stub from the property to the south. They're going to connect to that and have cross-access as required. Totally satisfied with that. They do have a sidewalk that provides pedestrian access connection to the north too, and then they meet their pedestrian access along the frontage adequately. In fact, we'll talk about that. Now, the existing sidewalk along Stevenson that goes the entire length of the frontage, I think it's very well connected to the building. They've got, you know, pavers there, and they've got, you know, landscaping and stuff that sort of accentuate it. So they have a nice isolated pedestrian walkway that crosses the parking areas, goes from the front entrance of the building straight out to Stevenson Highway, and I think it does a very good job. Like all of our recent plans under the new ordinance, they don't show the bike rack that's required if they have more than 10 spaces. So they do have to show a bike rack for at least 2 bicycles somewhere on the property. So we need to add that somewhere on the site plan. There's no natural resources issues on this site. It's an existing developed vacant building with typical site landscaping. I don't know if you went out there, but it's in kind of rough shape. So, you know, it's a comprehensive redevelopment of the site, but there's no protected natural features on that property. They have provided a photometric plan and lighting fixture details. There's no encroachment, and there are no non-residential, or it's all non-residential boundaries, so there's no light encroachment issues. And the light levels, I believe, are appropriate for a facility of this type. Now, the application does include a detailed landscape plan. It doesn't provide information for how some of the calculations have actually been arrived at, or whether or not they went through those calculations, but I'll walk you through the fact that I did, you know, the math, and it works out in most cases with just 2 minor exceptions. But on a revised plan, you know, there's a couple of things I detail in here where we would want to actually see the calculations listed on the plan. But they're not, again, that's just an informational requirement and doesn't have any bearing on what's actually proposed. They do have the 10-foot wide green belt that's required along the frontage. That's been preserved there. In terms of street trees, by my calculations, although they don't show calculations for this, but just judging by, you know, what's going on there, looking at the plan, they're planning to preserve a few trees, and then they're adding 8 new trees. They're going to end up being 1 tree short because basically it's a very small decimal. The requirement would be 11.06 trees here, and they have 11. But any part thereof requires a whole additional tree. It's not like parking where we round down. In landscaping, we always round up for any fraction thereof. So they just need to add 1 small deciduous tree, 2.5 diameter breast height tree, somewhere basically between the parking and the street there. And that's fine because they have a combination of a few preserved trees along with these others. In terms of the minimum landscaped area, they do exceed that, 37.2, as I mentioned before. I'm sorry, the landscaped area constitutes 37.2% of the site, but no formal calculations are provided in that regard. But again, like I said, that's just an informational thing that needs to be added to the plan. Parking lot landscaping. There are no notes specifically on how the parking lot landscaping section of the ordinance is being met. Again, like I said, no detailed, this many trees, et cetera, et cetera. But we'll walk through it really quick. There's a few requirements, as you recall, in the new ordinance for trees and landscaping islands in that in parking areas. There needs to be a minimum of 1 tree for every 8 parking spaces. So aside from the 11 proposed greenbelt trees and the additional 3 trees that are basically there, without getting into all the numbers and stuff, there's a few other existing trees that are being preserved on the site. There's 29 other existing trees that are either removed or will remain, and then there's a bunch of other trees being added to the site plan. When you boil it down, I think that they do have enough. They do have enough parking lot trees. All of the islands show a tree in them. They've got a band of trees along the perimeter on the south and along the east edge of the parking lot area there. In the past, we've allowed those to be counted as parking lot trees because they've only got so many islands and so many places to put them, so we're okay with them being in the perimeter. They put as many as they can in the islands and the bump outs and all that. And then there are a few additional trees. In fact, they have more trees than they need on this site overall. So they shouldn't have any problem complying. Again, the curbed islands need to be at least 200 square feet in area. Those are there. The locations of trees are okay and meet minimum ordinance requirements. The amount of landscape plantings at the perimeter, like I said, we allowed that to occur, and that's fine. Oh yeah, the last parking requirement that we really need to think about is the screening of the parking lot. Anytime we have a parking lot that faces a right-of-way like that without any building between it or when it's on its own, you recall when you pull into the site plan, they have an access drive, or a maneuvering lane, I suppose, that goes directly north, and then there's a bay of 10 parking spaces that you can pull west into, so your headlights would face Stevenson Highway right along there. Our ordinance requires that there be a 3-foot landscape berm in that lawn area there to basically to screen, the headlights, to screen the cars there. There are a few potential alternatives that you can do for a landscape berm in that part of the site. However, I don't think that this site qualifies for them. What the ordinance says is that you can do a wall, or the planning commission could approve a short wall, or you could approve landscaping in a case where a berm, either there's not enough space for it, or where it could impact traffic circulation or whatever. They've got plenty of room here. It doesn't really meet those criterion, so what you would have to do is put in a 3-foot berm just for that 100 feet there. In front of those parking spaces. There's no other additional landscaping requirements on top of those, but there does need to be that small berm, and that's an ordinance requirement. It's not something that we can modify or get away from. So again, adding a deciduous street tree, providing the landscape area calcs. There are a few errors and inconsistencies in the landscape plan with the existing tree inventory in terms of when they were done and all that. They do have the 2011 drawing that shows the most current, so that's the one that I went off of, but it seems that there was a tree that I can't tell if it's being preserved or not, that kind of thing. It doesn't have any bearing on their formal requirements. There's just some informational inconsistencies that might need to be cleaned up there. Some detailed landscape calcs, the berm, and then show protective techniques for the trees proposed to remain. Again, that's an informational requirement. So even though the reason I went through that in such detail is because it seemed a little exhaustive in my report, but as you can see, there's only, just the missing tree and the berm are the only actual things that need to be added to the plan. So far we've just got the bike rack, the berm, and the existing tree. Some other requirements are good. They didn't provide, material samples and stuff. Obviously, there's some things you can infer from the drawing, but there was no colors, material samples. I'm not sure if the applicant brought those with them tonight or wants to discuss those with you, but that would be one of the other requirements. And then all the plans were sealed all the way through, beginning to end. However, the architectural drawings, only the top sheet was sealed. So for the revised submittal, we've typically been asking for each individual sheet to be sealed. So the architectural packet was sealed by an architect, the engineering packet was sealed by an engineer, et cetera. But the rest of the remaining sheets, there's a couple of other sheets that just need to be sealed along with the top sheet. The last thing we need to go through is the special use request and the special use application. Again, this is a special use, and it is only permitted in this district with a special use permit. So Section 903 lays out all of the criteria that we need to look at. There's just a couple that I wanted to bring to your attention. Compatibility with adjacent uses. The proposed use is intended for this location within areas of high office, light industrial, commercial. The master plan supports it, discusses it. That's why we already considered this a lot in our rezoning review. Compatibility with the master plan, as I said, this is specifically mentioned and encouraged in the master plan. Traffic impact, in terms of access, circulation, all that kind of stuff, the only thing we really need is the bike rack for, that. In terms of the nature of the use being a hotel, it doesn't really have acute peak times like a 9-to-5 office does. I don't think it's going to have any more impact, greater or less net impact than any other use that would be permitted in this district. We don't expect any additional impact on public services, police, utilities, et cetera, except for what would normally be expected for any use that's permitted in this district. The engineering department did look at the plan. They didn't have any comments or objections to the plan at the preliminary stage. There's a couple of zoning ordinance compliance standards just in terms of information, and then those couple landscape issues I mentioned. But other than that, with just a couple of conditions of approval, they should easily be able to satisfy all conditions of the ordinance. A couple last things. A few things the Planning Commission is generally required to consider. Should the proposed use be permitted? Is its nature and character, materials, processes, equipment, et cetera, typically associated with the district? It's fine. Circulation is fine. Outdoor storage areas, work areas, none of that is under consideration. Hours of operation, in this case, it's going to, technically have 24 hours of operation. It's a hotel, but it's in an area with no residences. It's in an area that's basically shut down after hours. I don't have any objection to 24-hour operation in this area. We don't expect any additional traffic noise vibration other than that experienced during initial construction. So we support the project. We believe it does meet or exceed all minimum requirements for the special use permit and preliminary site plan, with several small conditions for clarification and compliance with minor elements. So I would recommend that you approve it, condition on the applicant satisfying those few comments, the 5 comments, one of which is sub-commented with the landscaping issues. If you have any questions.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Brannigan. Any questions? Anyone? Mr. Stratt?
Yeah, Zach, when they came before us, my recollection was that before they came in for preliminary, my recollection was that they were going to improve the retention pond as well, and they were talking about improving that entire area back in there, and I asked them what color fountains they were going to put in, if you recall. I don't see that incorporated in this plan.
Yeah, that's off-site, so I don't really know. It's not included in this plan. It's not something.
No, I'm saying that the presentation that was made, that was included into that. Now it's off-site. I understand it's not on this site plan, but I was just wondering what happened. Maybe I should ask the.
I think we could probably we could ask the applicant.
Yeah.
I don't have anything in my report from the engineering department about that.
I understand that.
Yeah, so I don't know, Mr. Stratt.
No, I understood that. I was just wondering what had happened, but I will ask when they come before us.
Sure. Anything else this time? Is the petitioner present? Please come forward. Would you please sign in and tell us about your project? I'm sure we could handle considering the size and scope of your project, I think a berm, a tree, and a bike rack is doable.
I think we can manage that.
Yeah, I think so.
The fountain is brand new to me, but we'll catch up on that. I guess I'll get caught up to speed.
Took me 15 minutes to get through that.
Okay. Terry Riddle.
Welcome.
What's the questions that we want to hit first?
Oh, anybody have questions? Do you want to make a presentation of any kind first, or would you rather just take questions?
Unless some people were absent, I was the one that was at the last meeting. Basically, here's the hotel, or actually an option of. This is one, which is a total brick that townships, some require all brick, or here's a combination and mixture, which is the prototype, actually, that Holiday Inn recommends. So,
okay. Do you have any comment on some of the requirements that were missing from the plan? There's nothing here that's major.
I mean, they'll be corrected, absolutely.
But in terms of the berm, bike
Berm's
rack,
not an issue.
the tree issues, tree preservation, any
Tree is not an issue.
any issues with anything that was presented so far? Not at all. Okay. Is there any questions or comments, Mr. Krant?
It says to provide sample swatches, materials, sheets, anything you bring in? We'd like to see it.
Same coloring as this here. This right here. This is the brick coloring, similar to what you had. A little darker. And this is the texture that actually can be done in any style.
Does anybody have a need to see these materials up close or not? You can pass it ahead to Mr. Sanzik, and he can pass it around just in case they do.
I have to apologize. I didn't hear the gentleman's name. And
Terry Riddle.
Oh, sir,
were you
sir?
with the Holiday Inn?
Mr. Riddle? We can't hear you. Need to be on the microphone so he can be
Terry
heard.
Riddle, Merrill Lodge Hospitality Group.
Thank you.
Any other questions at this time?
I was curious, was there some
Go ahead.
proposal to improve the retention basin, the existing regional basin?
I'm just getting word of that. I mean, I don't know. You're talking, I guess, maybe someone else mentioned something about a fountain. I don't know that we would have an objection to that. I just don't know what the purpose would be. It really couldn't be seen by 75. I mean, unless you drive into my back, unless you actually drive to the back of the building, would there be, I mean, unless you're wanting a 20-foot erection of a fountain of some sort that could be seen from the highway, I don't know.
Mr. Brannigan, is the discussion regarding the pond, is that a requirement for this particular plan? You said it's now off-site, so this is not under our purview at this time?
Here, just for, as you can see the plan up there, I'm kind of circling it. It's, it's to the east of the building. It's off their site. Their property boundary is here, and then there's a regional detention basin right here. I do remember that there was a conversation about that. It's not something that, would be, this is a special use, of course, but then again, we can't require off-site improvements as part of a site plan approval.
It isn't off-site.
Yeah, so it's off-site, but, I believe that there was some goodwill on the applicant's part to work with the engineering department to make sure that it was in good shape. So, the engineering department is aware of that, Brent's aware of it, and so am I. So as we go through the final site plan process, which would be administrative should you approve it, there's no reason that we couldn't discuss that in some detail with the applicant.
All right.
And I will say, I mean, we'll have no issue with making sure that it's.
I don't think it was necessarily. I don't think it's anything. It's not a major redevelopment of it. I think it was. Was there anything in particular, Mr. Stratt, about that that you recall that you wanted to just put on the record?
Yeah, I recall that I think it was Ted Wilson, the realtor, that made the presentation for them, and that was one of the comments that he did make, was that they were going to improve that, and they were going to actually have a fountain there so it could be seen from I-75. And I asked, what color was it going to be? And I distinctly remember that. So that was a part of the presentation that was given to us on a preliminary basis. Now I'm wondering what had happened.
Well, I mean, I would not be opposed to it at all. I think we would probably need some approval to clear out some trees along 75 in order, because we can't even see the building pretty much that we're building or that we're tearing down, much less a fountain, unless it is a huge fountain. So I don't know, that building that's there is it's got to be 25 feet. You can't even see the building from 75. So, I mean, if we can clear out those trees, that'd give me more visibility. I don't have an issue with that, and I'll put a fountain. So.
Well, Mr. Brannigan, what's the best way to, if that is the desire of certain members to pursue a fountain, but I don't want it to be something that holds up this project, can we just make just a recommendation in that regard, but not make it binding to the moving this process along?
Yeah, I think that this discussion that we've had, puts it on the record that there's still, not a concern from the Planning Commission, but a line of questioning about whether or not something was going to happen there. We will, I'll follow up on it with Brent, with the engineering department, and with the applicant. I don't think probably that you'd want to make it a condition, a trigger condition or anything
a requirement,
like that.
just a recommendation.
I think probably just the discussion that we've had is adequate in this regard to make sure that it's still on the table. And, I can make no guarantees one way or the other because I don't know anything about the engineering issues involved.
I would like to just.
We don't have enough detail to make a qualified decision regarding that anyway.
Yeah.
And I would just like to note on
pros and cons
that if we if we proceeded with that again, and I'm not opposed to it, I would want to do some noise testing from highway, because obviously we utilize a lot of times those buffers that are natural buffers there that kind of tone down the noise, especially for sleeping guests, to make sure that there's not going to be a huge impact there before we looked at kind of clearing anything so that it could be visible.
Right,
You
there
know,
could be other
something like that.
impacts too. You talk
Yeah.
about taking away trees and other matters. It
Right.
has to be looked at objectively to, like I said, to assess the pros and cons.
But we're open to the discussion, absolutely.
All right. Well, at this time, Mr. Edmonds, something else?
How close is the backside of the hotel to I-75? What is that distance?
To I-75, well, you can see here on the drawing
To
that
the right of way to I-75?
let's see, you can see here on the drawing, let's look at this one here. The red outline is their property boundary, and then you can see the detention basin is to the east of their property, and it separates them from the freeway. You know, their site is, like I said, it's like almost 3.4 acres. Their building is about 100 and, I don't know, what it was, 130 some odd feet from that back property line. So the building is actually going to be pushed forward compared with where that existing building is now. Their building will be more like where that white part of the building is you could imagine that's more like the footprint of their building. So it's going to be at least 130 feet from there. Their property is, you know, I don't have all the details in front of me. It's probably 300 some odd feet deep. 400 feet deep. So I think that if you look at here,
It's at least 200 and...
I was going to say, it's another few hundred feet.
Hold on, sir.
Yeah.
He's-
So it's probably, I mean, I'm just guessing that building has got to be 500 feet from the Interstate 75 right-of-way.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, at this time, sir, please have a seat. We're going to
I have one other
public
question,
hearing on this
Sheriff.
matter. Pardon me?
I have another question.
Oh, go ahead, Mr. Stratton.
Okay.
Didn't hear that.
As a part of our submission package, we also request as part of photometrics, some of the cuts on the fixtures that are being used. I know you have them listed here as what they are, but they didn't submit those, I'm assuming.
No, they did.
They did
I
submit
think
those?
they did.
The-
Yes.
Yeah, I think they did. I'm sorry if they're not, well, I didn't put together the materials that went out to you. I believe they did as a separate submittal. I got yeah, I believe that they did. There's a bollard, a simple contemporary bollard, and then a typical parking lot landscaping, you know, box cutoff light. I can't remember. what
Shoebox?
else would be.
Are they the shoebox type? I see it here. I didn't identify it. I didn't look it up when I was looking through that, but I know that they're identified there. Concern I have is they're 25 foot high, but they're you know, we're trying to actually minimize that type of lighting as part of the Big Beaver corridor study indicated, but it was already submitted, so that's fine. That's great.
Yeah, they submitted them, and yeah, they're a little, they're taller and slightly more infrequent, but the lighting levels that are proposed for this are, if we were talking about a retail parking lot or a gas station or something where we had really high light levels, it might have been something I would have flagged more strenuously in my review, but I think the lighting levels that they have proposed aren't too extreme, but you're right, they're a little bit taller fixture.
All right, anything else at this time?
Yeah, one other question. Did you have a pre-meeting with them? You know,
On
before they...
on this particular application, no.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay.
All right, well, at this time, we'll open a public hearing on this matter. Is there anyone present wishing to speak regarding this item? Nope, seeing no one, I'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the table. I think the requirements that are lacking are pretty minor. I think we can move this along with a few minor conditions. What's the pleasure of the board? Mr. Sands?
Yeah, I'd like to resolve that the special use approval and preliminary site plan approval for the proposed Holiday Inn Express Hotel and Suites located on the east side of Stevenson Highway, north of 14 Mile Road, at 466 Stevenson, Section 35, within the OM zoning ordinance, be granted following to the subject conditions.
I'll second it.
It's conditions.
He has to
Oh,
state conditions.
yeah.
It's got to go to 18.
That they show the lot coverage calculations. 2, add a bike rack with capacity of at least 2 bicycles. 3, satisfy the landscape requirements as follows. Add 1 deciduous street tree. Provide landscaping area calculations. Correct errors and inconsistencies in the landscape plan and existing tree inventory. D, provide detailed landscaping calculations showing that all requirements of section 13.02 as is being met. E, add a 3-foot landscape berm in the lawn area between the parking lot and the right-of-way for Stevenson Highway, specifically along the length of the actual area where the 10-foot parking spaces facing Stevenson are proposed. And F, show protective techniques for trees proposed to remain. 4, seal the remaining architectural sheets. And 5, provide samples, swatches, or manufacturer's specification sheets of the predominant proposed exterior materials and colors of all buildings and permanent structures, including walls and fences.
I'll second that.
All right.
I'll second
We motion Mr. Senzika and second Mr. Stratton. Discussion on the motion? Vote on the motion, please.
Mr. Maxwell?
Yes.
Mr. Zanzika?
Yes.
Mr. Stratt?
it. Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Allman?
Yes.
Mr. Edmonds?
Yes.
Mr. Krant?
Yes.
The motion passes. We're very excited about you coming to Troy, and good luck to you, and hope the process continues to be smooth for you.
You want to follow up with Brent on Monday when he returns, and he can start guiding you through the final site plan process. Yeah, you can get started right away with those guys, yep. Yep.
You're welcome.
You.
Next item on the agenda is item 6. It's a public hearing, a special use request and preliminary site plan review, file number issue 391, a proposed Kroger Retail Fuel Center, D464, southwest corner of South Boulevard and Crooks, 2105 West South Boulevard, Section 5, currently zoned and a neighborhood node district. This is controlled by consent judgment. Mr. Brannigan?
Yep. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with this property probably very well at South Boulevard and Crooks. This is where the existing Kroger is. There's a CVS. Those are your anchor tenants, and there's a number of other smaller retail tenants at this site. I've got the image up there now just to refamiliarize yourself with it. There's a large regional detention basin to the south. Obviously, it's right at the north boundary of the community there. There's some open space and other uses surrounding. This whole property, the entire Northfield Commons development, is covered by consent judgment. So my review, as usual with consent judgments, is more of a memorandum format, talking about specific planning issues, because our real objective here is just to make a recommendation to City Council on what they should do to either amend or not amend the consent agreement to allow this use to go forward. Given that the use is a special use in this district, the underlying zoning district in that, Brent, felt we should process it basically as a special use, have a public hearing, everything like it's a regular special use, but really the action that we're looking for you to do is to make a recommendation with regard to the special use and site plan to City Council at the end of this, one way or another. My review, which starts on page 34 of your digital packet, is just a few pages and not quite as complex maybe as the last one. But essentially what the applicant is looking to do is to add a vehicle fueling multi-use station in a new, I call it an outlot, but it's actually not going to be legally separated from the rest of the shopping center, but it's basically essentially functioning as an outlot of the Kroger Shopping Center, Common Shopping Center. It basically would be nestled kind of right in that northeast corner of the property, but doesn't actually look to propose any new curb cuts or anything that would actually affect the presence that that development has on the right-of-way. And before I get into it, you'll know if you've been out there, there's a pretty significant grade separation between the actual road and then, down in the parking lot. There's like a 3-foot drop, right away, but really from the actual road surface to the sidewalk and then from the sidewalk down. But if you're driving down, like right in that corner, today I drove right down in that corner, and the top of my small car doesn't even go above the top of those bushes. And when you're there, you're looking up at cars. So, it's a pretty significant drop, and that will play a little bit into our thoughts about screening and street trees and things like that. Also, there's very mature landscaping along there, and there's nothing in this application that would indicate that it's proposed for any sort of changes or removal. So, basically, everything would take place inside the boundaries of the curb for the parking lot, renovating and changing areas of the parking lot and circulation, and then basically plunking a gas station down right in that area. So as I said, although it's controlled by consent judgment, the underlying zoning classification is now neighborhood node district. It's in node U. It's a site type A, street type A. And in that case, in the nodes, you are permitted to have a gas station subject to special use. So that's why we are where we are. For purposes of comparison, the applicant actually just used, this used to be, given that the old zoning district, which doesn't occur anymore, the commercial zoning district before the consent judgment, they used our general business district for purposes of comparison when they laid out their dimensional, what they're doing. They indicate that it's all consent judgment, but then they say, well, if this were GB, these are the requirements. I really don't have a problem with that being on the plan because, had none of this occurred and if they were tied to the old zoning, that old zoning district became GB, so it really doesn't make any difference. A few things about the plan, as I mentioned, no new curb cuts are proposed. It's going to be located right in there. We support very much the location of this. I mean, if you're going to have a gas station, built into an existing development, this is a great way to do it, in the outlet, in a visible spot right along the road there. However, we have all these natural conditions that sort of shield and obscure the use just enough to where they can still be successful, but where, it's not going to be nearly as obnoxious for people walking up and down the road. And the fact that there's no new curb cuts immediately adjacent that car wash is going to have basically no net impact on the way that this site interacts with the streets around it. I wouldn't anticipate there being a huge amount of, perceptible new volume to this site. There's already two very busy roads, and it's a very busy shopping complex already. They're probably going to be counting on capturing a tremendous amount of existing users on the site there for the project. Now, that being said, any gas station is going to create new trips. But, that being said, I think that we're probably okay here. No comments or anything from engineering in that regard that I'm aware of. Given that this is in an existing parking area, we should talk about parking just a little bit. The site is very much overparked under our new conventional zoning, where it conventionally zoned and consent judgment didn't apply. It's 76,512 square feet. It would require 255 spaces. There's a slight typo. It states that 256 would be required. However, as I mentioned, we round down in parking, not up when it's a fraction of half or less. The refueling facility itself would require 16 spaces and then 2 for the 125 square feet, although it's not actually retail square feet, so we wouldn't necessarily even require those 2 additional spaces, but for the purposes of this, let's say that they're there. So 273 spaces would be required for the site overall after the addition of the refueling facility. With the spaces that they're going to lose based on putting the facility in, they'd lose 54 because of this new area here. They're still going to have 411, so they're going to still greatly exceed minimum ordinance requirements. They're actually bringing it further into compliance, though, because they're eliminating a ton of parking spaces, putting in this additional use. So the idea of densifying a site, adding more uses to the property, reducing the amount of excess parking, because as you know, the new ordinance requires that we not allow parking that's 20% in excess of what's required by the ordinance. So were this a new project and they came in asking for 411 and only 270 some were required, we wouldn't allow that unless we had a special exemption to do that. But they are bringing it much closer into compliance than they were before. So far so good. Specific vehicle refueling station standards. The ordinance has this listed as a specific use, and you know that in our Article 6 we have specific use standards. So there's a few. There's a couple of things. The minimum lot area needs to be 1 acre. The overall site is 8.74 acres. The actual area, although there's no formal boundary because this is not going to be parceled off as a separate property, the actual formal area of the gas station itself is less than that, significantly less than that, but that's okay because when we're looking at the 1 acre, that's also got to incorporate some landscaped area, open space, that kind of stuff. Well, this site has that. It just doesn't happen to have it in the area adjacent to gas stations. So they're still meeting all minimum ordinance requirements. I don't have any issue with the area because it's not defined as a separate parcel. Setback calculations, I provided a detailed table. They meet the setback calculations. You know that it's kind of complicated for these. We look at setbacks from the pump islands, from the supports, and from the top part itself, and then obviously from the building. The building in this case doesn't come into play because it's a small kiosk that's entirely within the boundaries of the shelter, of the canopy. So there's nothing really there. Were this conventional zoning and this were a retail building, given this is a neighborhood node district, the building would have to be 10 feet from both property lines. That's what we would look for. But in this case, the specific use provisions supersede those requirements because we have specific use provisions for gas stations that require them to be located here, and they meet all of those. In terms of the canopy structures, the specific use requirements state that the canopy structures have to be designed, construction, in a manner which is architecturally compatible with the principal building. Those images that are in your packet that were sent later by the applicant after our letter, I think they they show that, this generally is. The actual canopy edges itself are, typical, like a canopy, it's metal signage and stuff is on it, but the supports, the structures, the pump islands, the kiosk building itself are all built with the same kind of materials that the main building is. I think that those renderings, those perspective renderings, do a pretty good job of showing you what it's going to look like. If you have any specific questions, I'm sure you can talk to the applicant. But they're common materials and colors for other similar structures, for other types of gas stations. One thing that wasn't totally clear from the plan, the required fire protection devices, these are the tanks that hang on the underside of the canopy. We've got a few older ones where those are very, very visible. Typically now we require the canopy edges to be, much wider than the actual roof deck so that it obscures those. It wasn't totally clear that those were going to be obscured. I believe they are when you looked at the cross-section of the canopy structure, but, and then obviously if those renderings are accurate, then, they would show that nothing would be shown there. But if we want to discuss that with the applicant, we could. So it does appear to be satisfied. I'm just not, there's no formal documentation on the plan that states that. In terms of pedestrian circulation, I think that it does a very good job, given that it's isolated within an existing parking lot. They've done a pretty good job having access at basically 3 points, 2 on the west side, one at the very top, kind of coming in the corner, and then 1 at the very east side. The pump islands are situated north-south. They can come and go as they please depending on what side the pump is on your car, with main east-west circulation on either side. The building doesn't get in the way because it's right in the middle of all the pump islands, so it's pretty good. I don't think there's any need for additional pedestrian circulation or access to this building. It's not like it's a retail building or a restaurant. People that are going there are going to be in cars. So I wouldn't think there needs to be any sort of pedestrian connection from the main right-of-way sidewalks. In fact, I'd prefer it if they remain basically just how they are now. So I think that they're absolutely okay there. They're satisfied, I said, in terms of pedestrian. There's no pedestrian vehicular conflicts or anything like that from what I can see. And they're utilizing the existing network of on-site circulation for cars, and it seems to be working fine. There's no service, sales, repair, nothing like that related to vehicles, so they'll be okay. There's no vehicle wash proposed, so they're okay there. Those are the only other specific use provisions. In terms of landscaping and lighting, like I said, the perimeter shrubs and trees are not proposed for removal. 5 trees, 9 shrubs, 39 ornamentals are going to be relocated. I went out there today, and that island that's out there now has got some pretty tall shrubs. A couple of the trees are in a little bit rough shape, but they show them relocated on the plan. So they do show new locations for those. If they don't survive, they're still going to have to put new ones in to replace those because the plan shows trees in those locations. So I'm confident that the way they've proposed the landscape plan is just fine. Any existing nonconformities with regards to overall site landscaping were from the previous ordinance. I don't think that I would want to start requiring additional street trees or asking for additional street trees along that north boundary because they've got such good mature landscaping there already, and because of the site differential in terms of the grade, I don't think it's an issue. If you've been out there, you'll see that the street trees that are going up and down the east boundary of the site are very mature for street trees. They look really good. The trees that are on the site look very good. Everything's very healthy. I would say just leave it the way it is if you could, especially given the flexibility we have as this being a consent judgment project. The photometric plan does provide pretty detailed light levels. There are some slightly elevated levels here, whereas with the Holiday Inn we were looking at 2.5-foot candles underneath some of the towers here. Typical underneath the canopy, it's pretty bright. You're looking at areas that are between 22 and 26-foot candles. Our ordinance doesn't specifically talk about lighting underneath the canopy. It talks about lighting at the base of a light pole, and it says the absolute maximum that we would allow is 20-foot candles during business hours and 10 after hours. This is a gas station that's going to operate well into the evening, and because it's covered and shrouded and because of the grade differential, we definitely understand the need there to be a lot of light down there to make sure that it's safe and everybody can see it, all that. And they're also going to be relying on some of that for visibility for their projects since you can't even see the building from the road. That being said, some of those bright spots that are near 26-foot candles, I think it would probably be best that, that they dim some of those down just a little bit to bring them closer to the 20. It would be better if most of the under canopy area is between 18 and 22-foot candles already. It's just those real acute areas over the pump islands. Maybe you could discuss with the applicant, if the proposed lighting levels were reduced to about 20-foot candles or less throughout the majority of the under canopy area, that would be great. But, then again, like I said, we don't have a formal requirement specifically in that regard, and it is a consent judgment, albeit a special use. But you can do with that as you may during your recommendation. I can't make a real final determination with regard to encroachment of light levels off-site. Now, there are no non-residential sites around here, in our community anyway. And it's only because on the photometric plan, they don't show the north and east property boundary. They just show, basically their development site and then the light spill going off. And I don't know if it takes into consideration the topographical change or not. But on a revised plan or something they would submit further on up the pipeline to City Council, I think it would probably be better if that photometric plan showed that the lighting levels weren't going to exceed a foot candle at the right-of-way line. But I think that it's probably okay. It's just hard to tell from the plan that was submitted. So that was really it. So our recommendation is that the project is very well sited. It's very well situated. Things appear to be planned very well. It's bringing the site actually further into compliance with the ordinance with regard to parking and some of its nonconformities. So we recommend that you recommend to City Council that the preliminary site plan and special use be approved as part of the consent judgment amendment with just a couple of conditions, demonstrating that the required fire protection devices under the canopy are screened, unless the applicant can show that to your satisfaction tonight, and demonstrate compliance with light levels along the South Boulevard and Crooks Road rights-of-way. A third possible one would have been the reduction of the light levels underneath there, but you can discuss that with the applicant and do with that as you may. It's not a formal ordinance requirement, so I didn't put it in here as a condition of approval, but that's all that I had.
Great, thank you. Any questions of Mr. Brannigan? All right, is the petitioner present? Come forward, please. Now, please sign in and tell us who you are and tell us about your project.
Matthew Pisco, Lane Plan Engineering, representing the Kroger Company of Michigan. I couldn't have said it better myself. That was wonderful. But if I can, in a real brief presentation, explain to you what this gas station is and what it isn't. Kroger, over the last 10 or 15 years, has become a bona fide petroleum marketer. They've got over 1,000 of these from Alaska to Maine and south through a variety of different trade names. So they actually, as far as oil companies go, they're a big operator. They're very good. They're very environmentally conscious. It's a great design. It's repeatable. It's intrinsically tied to the big box store. This does not operate independent of the big box store. During construction, we'll actually marry the kiosk store to the electronic communication room in the Kroger store. So the cash register to the brains in the store, that cash register is actually in the store. So all transactions that occur, so that kiosk can't be open without the big box store. Typically speaking, the kiosk will shut an hour earlier than the big box store so that they can do all the cash out and the processing. The stations go dark after that, to your note about the 10 foot candles after hours. They don't want to encourage people to go there only in that people get irritated if they go to a station that's lit and it's closed. So typically the gas station runs concurrent with the big box store, which is a big issue for a lot of communities. So doesn't run independent of the Kroger store.
Is it about 9 p.m. or so?
I think around 10 o'clock it goes
10
dark.
10 p.m. it usually goes close.
It adds the equivalent of 5 full-time jobs. So it has, the cashiers are shared between the store and the kiosk, so anyone that's in the store can work in the kiosk. It's a neat operation. We're proud to present them. A couple of things in general, from the photometric perspective, we're very sensitive. It's task-oriented lighting underneath the canopy. Light loss factor in a couple of weeks after this thing opens, or if we did the grid marginally different or spread it out, those numbers probably would be. But truth in advertising, we do the same grid for everything regardless. This is what they come up. All the lights, if you can imagine, are not only not visible points of light at the canopy deck, they're all actually pulled up from the canopy deck. So they're actually focused at the dispenser. So people, as they're pulling their wallet out of their purse out, are doing credit card transactions. That's most of what occurs there. They can see in their comfort level they're opening their gas cap. So that's something that, from a safety perspective and operational, it is task lighting. We're sensitive to that. But again, loss light factor, you give a couple of months, bugs, dust, those lights are going to be well below what would normally be the ordinance for lighting outside. we're underneath the canopy. So if at all possible, we'd like to do that. I suspect we'll comply shortly after the lights have burnt in a little bit. Regarding fire suppression, I'll admit this in front of my beloved client Kroger. I've read the ordinance several times over, and I can't find where the fire suppression system is required. If it's required, we'll comply. Out of the 43 sites we have in Michigan, we only have one that has fire suppression. We hid the tanks on the top, so they weren't visible from anywhere on the site. And the nozzles were in the canopy deck because that's where they serve their purpose. But we'll comply with the ordinance if it's required, and we can hide it above the canopy deck. If it's not required, the best thing I can say is I can get rid of the whole thing if the ordinance doesn't require it, because the state fire marshal does not require fire suppression, and we're not obligated to safely operate, to put one in. We don't think they're necessary.
I don't know whether or not I don't know whether or not they're required. They're not required by the zoning ordinance. I don't know whether or not they're required by our fire chief or by our standards, but I think that that's a perfectly acceptable approach, is if they're required, because I can't speak to that. I'm not sure if Mr. Motzi can, probably not. If they're required, then they'd be screened in accordance with the ordinance. We have that in the ordinance. That was in the old ordinance, that requirement, so something tells me that maybe we do, but I don't know. Brent might know that off the top of his head, but unfortunately I don't.
I used to work for Sunoco back in the day when we did, it was in the ordinance, and I remember it, but I don't think it is anymore, because I scoured the ordinance. But again, so it's not a sticking point. If it's required by ordinance, we'll install it and we'll hide the cans.
This evening, we are just here to make a recommendation to City Council, because this is under consent judgment. We could make a notation to just look at that to see if that is a requirement, since we're not able to confirm whether it is or not at this time. But we are not making a final decision here. We're just making a recommendation and moving it on to City Council. So.
Mr. Maxwell, I would just suggest that if you do make a motion in the affirmative, rather than saying, that it be screened, to just say if fire suppression is required prior to final site plan, that it be screened in accordance with that section of the ordinance. That would be an appropriate way to word it.
Sure, I think so. Mr. Tagle?
I just want to make sure that if screening is required, that you do it above the roof. Is that how you do it? Or it's, because I like the fact that the profile of the canopy is very, very thin, as opposed to deepening that profile and getting that to be a heavy-looking.
We want, believe it or not, and I know petroleum marketers typically want fireballs and flames on the canopy. Kroger is very conscientious about their design. It's transparent to the big box store. That's what drives the sites. But we can hide it. We've hid them effectively, the one that we've done.
Without deepening the fascia?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we can orient the tanks flat on the canopy deck. And the last issue was the light bleed off. We're going to be to zero 10 feet from where we are. We're going to be to zero long before we ever hit a property line. So I'm confident we can comply with that. And if you have any questions, as my wife will attest, I'll prattle on all night long.
Okay. Is there any questions? Mr. Strand?
Did you submit cuts as a part of your lighting?
The cut sheets for the fixtures are on the photometric plan C201 in the lower left-hand
I did not
corner.
see that. The soffit lighting, do the lenses project below the soffit itself?
No.
No, I think they're
recessed or flush?
The lenses are flush. The fixtures are actually, the light source is actually above the canopy deck.
Right, but the lenses are either flush or recessed from the soffit itself?
Yes, they are. Yes, they are.
So there's a lamp bracket on a different.
Sheet C201 in
That's the one thing that we've been experiencing on these gas stations. They have the lenses that project down, and they're very, very offensive.
Yeah, there's no visible. I know. No, I see it. I apologize. I have 9 pair of glasses.
Yeah, they're very small, but they're here. They're in the.
I'm not sure I really.
Right behind your on your screen.
I'm not sure I understand what that is. That really is. I'd like to see I'd rather see the manufacturer's cut, but then you can actually see what that is. Are they projected down below the soffit? Is that what that is? That curb around there?
That curve is actually above the canopy.
That's a recess. You can see this thing in the middle here. Well, you're not going to see mine, but
I see it over
in the
there.
upper image, that thing that's in the very center to me looks like a floodlight bulb that's recessed up into a half dome that goes up into it.
It's like a
It looks
can
like
light.
to me too. Is that what it is?
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, and the other one is just the flat lens.
Well, you're guaranteeing that, right?
If you want to.
No, I understand. I just want to clarify. if he says that's what it is, that's,
And not to mention too, the cross-section of the canopy shows that the canopy, outer boundary does extend slightly below the bottom part of the roof deck part too. So there's a little bit of screening there in terms of looking great. I know we always are looking at it from an angle, but
yeah.
I believe that when I looked at it to my satisfaction that they're recessed. What you don't want to see is wall packs plugged onto a flat surface, and that's
Right,
not what
that's
they're
exactly
proposing.
right, yeah.
We don't either.
Any other questions at this time? Mr. Edmonds?
Zach, do you know, did the fire marshal or the fire department don't they typically review these?
Yeah, they typically do. I didn't receive any comments directly to me about it. Brent told me, over the phone, he looked at it and he said he didn't get any other departmental comments specifically about this. They didn't mention it either way. So, something that's as detailed as like, some of the engineering specs or fire suppression and stuff, they might not look at that until the final site plan. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Sansica?
I'm just curious, are there any other of these stations in the area for Kroger?
26-mile Romeo Plank, 21 in Card, 30-mile in Romeo Plank, Ford Road in Dearborn Heights.
Nothing in Oakland County?
No, help me out, Tom. I'm trying to think of what would be. Gratiot and Frasio? That's not close.
Sir, you need to come to the microphone and please identify yourself and get to be on TV.
Good evening. I'm Tom Frank. I'm the real estate manager for the Kroger Company. Some of the other locations that we've got in the east side of the city are in St. Clair Shores at 13 Mile and Harbor. Let's see. The rest are pretty much on the south side of the city, through Monroe, Westland, Southgate.
That's fine. I think you answered my question. Thank you.
Please.
I guess, I imagine this is very similar to what Costco has. And they're,
Except for a lot of the Costco facilities have projecting light fixtures, and ours are all flush with the canopy. We do not go below. We are very sensitive to that issue with municipalities, and we keep it up flush with it. Why put it in and have a problem? Address it up front.
thank you.
All right, anything for Mr. Strad, do you have another question, or you're good? All right. Mr. Rowland, do you have something? All right, Mr. Tagle, over this side, all right.
On your elevation sheets, there's an element identified as Y. It's got a bubble Y. Can you tell me what that is? It's on the piers, on the brick, or either behind the piers? Protruding?
That would be the dispenser number placard, so that people, when somebody goes to pay, I'm at pump, and they look, and you forget from that time you walk to the dispenser, that's the placard to help them find
Thank you.
what number it is.
Anything else this time? All right, well, we need to have a public hearing on this matter. If you gentlemen can please have a seat for a minute. We'll open the public hearing. Is there anyone present wishing to speak regarding this item? Seeing no one, we'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the board. Any comments? Mr. Evans?
I just have a general comment. I think I was out there, and I think it's a perfect location. I'd sure like to see this fuel center as opposed to a full-service gas station.
Sure. I think it's a great project.
Great.
You should tear down that other one.
So I'd like to make a motion on this item. Mr. Edmonds?
Resolved, the Planning Commission hereby recommends to City Council that special use approval and preliminary site plan approval for the proposed Kroger Retail Fuel Center located at the southwest corner of South Boulevard and Crooks Road, Section 5, with the NN zoning district controlled by consent judgment be granted subject to the following. Hang on. Number one, demonstrate that the required fire protection devices under the canopy are architecturally screened so that the tanks are not directly visible from the street. And number two, demonstrate compliance with light levels along the South Boulevard and Crooks Road rights of way.
Well, I think on the fire suppression, we're not sure if that's a requirement or not. So Mr.
Do
Craig?
you want to make an amendment to it, or can I just include it in the existing?
Why don't we just add to the, we can
Well, and
mention it
that
and add it
number one,
to
yeah,
the...
and then just say, then after that last statement on number one, if fire suppression equipment is necessary.
Or required.
Or required.
I would support that.
Yeah, well, that's your motion.
That's my motion.
That's your motion.
All right.
I could support it.
All right. Does that motion meet our requirements, Mr. Motzni?
Oh, yeah, it should be fine. I mean, the printed motion also says demonstrate that the required fire protection devices be screened. So, I mean, if they're not...
Kind of says it in the same way, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It says it in the same way. Okay, that's fine. Well, the motion by Mr. Edmonds, second from Mr. Krent. Any discussion on that motion? Vote on the motion, please.
Mr. Zanzika?
Yes.
Mr. Stratt?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Allman?
Yes.
Mr. Edmonds?
Yes.
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Mr. Maxwell?
Yes. Well, the motion passes. Good luck to you. We think it's a great project. All right. Next is item number 7. It's a special use request and preliminary site plan review. File number SU 388A. Proposal to build foster care home north side of Square Lake, east of beach, 2420 West Square Lake, Section 6. Currently zone R1A, one-family residential district. This item, or this matter, is going before the Board of Zoning Appeals, and it is before us this evening for questions and comments. We are not going to take any action on this item. Mr. Brannigan, do you have any further to add on this one?
There is no formal report from me on this particular project. There's only Brent's memorandum, although we talked about it together, but that's because we don't have a full-blown, application to look at again. Also, the application is going to look exactly the same as it did the last time when it was here just a couple months ago. So you'll recall that we granted a special use permit to allow the number of residents that were allowed by ordinance on this site, which is 9, based on the area requirement. Now, they're in a weird situation because the site was platted 200 by 200. When it's actually formally surveyed, it falls just short of 40,000 square feet. We require 4,000 square feet per resident for a facility of this type. So were it platted directly in accordance with what they thought a 200 by 200 lot should be, then it would allow 10 residents. However, it falls just short by 30 some feet or something, or 27 square feet or something of that, really small. So they're just a few square feet per resident short of actually being able to have 10 residents. They decided to proceed anyway with their special use request before. They got permit approval from you for 9 with a few conditions. You remember, a little screening wall, for the trash area, stuff like that. But we had a public hearing, it was approved, and they've proceeded. And they had improved the garage area, which is where those units were. It became part of the building, et cetera. So that's all well and good. The applicant now wants to go through the process to try to obtain approval to do 10 on the site as they would have been permitted. In order to do that, they can't change the area of the site. It's platted the way that it is, but they are going to seek a variance from the Board of Zoning Appeals. If they're successful with that variance from the Board of Zoning Appeals, which basically the variance would be from the 4,000 foot requirement, it would be something along the lines of to permit, 1 per 3,997 square feet or something along those lines. So it's going to modify that 4,000 foot requirement down by a few square feet per resident. That's what they would be trying to obtain. If they're successful with that variance, that then of course changes their standard for this particular site, then they can proceed with a traditional special use permit and all that. They're going to have to go through the same process they did before, because our special use permit is for 9. They're going to need to, you could call it an amendment to the special use permit, but they're just going to get a new special use permit that allows 10. With a preliminary site plan. Now that is if they're successful at the BZA. To further muddy matters, our zoning ordinance requires that they come and appear before you before they go to the BZA. So we've already scheduled a public hearing for these guys for September 13th, but they're meeting with you in accordance with the requirements of the BZA section of the zoning ordinance. So if you have any questions, you want to discuss it with the applicant at all, or want to know anything about what's going on, this is your opportunity to do that. They're going to go to the BZA, in the next few weeks, find out whether or not they get the yay or nay on the area requirement. And if they do, then they'll be back here for that public hearing in September, along with their site plan and all that, and we can consider the special use permit ramifications at that time. But that's all that we have right now.
All right. Any questions for Mr. Brannigan? All right. The applicant is present. If you'd like to come forward and make any comments this evening, you're more than welcome to do so.
Nathan Robinson with Horizon Engineering. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Does anyone have any questions? Mr. Ullman?
I remember we assumed we had 40,000 square feet. Is that correct?
No.
No, we did not?
No, we did not.
Is that the reason is that the reason we approved 9 instead of 10 at that time?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, because they were just fractionally short of the 4,000 per resident to get 10. They had 39,973, so my report said they could have 9.98 people there, which was 9.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Mr.
So there's no problem with the existing bedrooms and everything with adding another resident there?
No, actually, when you look at the state requirements to calculate because they have to get not only approval from the city of Troy, but also the state licensing requirements. When you look at the state licensing requirements, they calculated that if you want to call it density or occupancy, they calculate that differently in the city. The city of Troy uses the lot area or the area of the property, whereas the state of Michigan uses the usable square footage of the bedrooms. And so when you take into consideration the 7 bedrooms and you figure out the usable square footage, it actually comes out to 13 occupants. They couldn't go 13, 12 is where the state caps it based on their definition of that use. But yeah, they would easily be able to handle 13 if they could get approved for that, but we realize that's above and beyond what we could do.
Nathan, if I'm not mistaken, how many rooms are there? How many bedrooms are there?
There's 7.
There's 7?
7 bedrooms.
So yeah, so there's 3 rooms that would be double occupancy. Right now they just have 2 rooms that would be double occupancy, right?
Yeah, and technically...
Or something like that, or there's a...
Something on that order. And actually, I've got it here in front of me. There's actually one room that's large enough to have 3 people, but that might be a little unrealistic to fit 2 beds in there, or 2 beds, 3 beds. But yeah, there's 2 bedrooms at single occupancy. There could be 4 bedrooms at double occupancy, and like I said, there was another bedroom that could potentially have 3, but that's a little excessive.
Okay, any other questions? Well, I guess we have nothing further at this time. We'll just wait and see the outcome of the review of the Board of Zoning Appeals. Thanks for coming in. Next, we have public comments for items on the current agenda. Apparently, no one wants to speak on that regard, so we'll close that item. And next is Planning Commission comments. Mrs. Zarnecki, do you have any comments this evening? Kathy, any comments this evening? Mr. Sanziga?
No, I'm just, I know we try to be apolitical around here, but I'm just very pleased that the library millage passed, and I think it's the best thing for our community, and I apologize if I'm being political, but I do think that it was very positive for our community. So, and there again, also on the transit center, I'm happy to hear that that's moving ahead too, with the track relocation. So, other than that, I don't have any other comments.
Mr. Strad? Okay, Mr. Edmonds?
I was really pleased that we're going to be getting to the sign ordinance. I think that's a positive direction for this group.
Mr. Ullman?
No, nothing at this time.
Okay. Mr. Cram?
Nothing.
Mr. Tagle?
No, thank you.
Mr. Brannigan?
No, I was going to mention the sign ordinance thing. Brent sent that out to you. He sent it to me as well. He's genuinely interested in getting your input on it. So I know a lot of us haven't probably ever really looked at the sign ordinance in any detail. I know I never have because we don't review them as part of our preliminary site plan. So to help Brent out, to help the department out, help me out, I would suggest if you get a chance, take a look at it, and if there's any particular aspect of signs around town you don't like, let the department know so that they can incorporate them in the changes. They already started down the line of looking at revisions and stuff. I think probably what you'll ultimately get is not a wholesale replacement of your existing sign ordinance, but it's going to be, a series of tweaks in the right direction. And I think that's going to probably be what you end up with. But that was good. And I just want to say that I'm pleased with some of the applications we've gotten in lately. And, it's nice to have some site plan activity going on. We've had we didn't have a planning report or anything at the beginning of this meeting, but I will say that there's been even more interest in a few other, form-based code sites and applicants interested in complying with the form-based code. So I've been very pleased that the preliminary discussions we've had, I can't let the cat out of the bag yet on any particular applicants or properties yet to protect them, but it's been very refreshing that people have come in and said, hey, I've got this site, I'm in the Big Beaver District, and how far can I put my building up again? I mean, we've had, people that are, genuinely on board. So I think over the next year, we should hopefully see some exciting things, regardless of the economy up and down. It's pretty encouraging.
So you see an uptick in activity?
I would say, things have been steady. We've obviously had, we had 3-4 applications this month, and the last few months have been like that. And then there's a lot of sniffing around. We've got a lot of real estate brokers that have been in the property trying to understand aspects of the new ordinance, and they've been, especially people that are representing commercial properties that have been sitting vacant, and now they've got maybe some expanded economic opportunity on that property because of the new ordinance. So they want to understand the new playbook, or they come into us with a new idea, and a lot of it is still, those building Form A type stuff, the small building outlot stuff, but, right up near the street, restaurants, retail, things like that. So I'm hopeful that a few new and unique applications are going to drop in the next 60, 90 days. So maybe we'll have hopefully, we'll have a decent review season over the winter with some new projects, looking for approval for spring construction in 2012. That would be my hope.
That'd be great. Mr. Mostny, anything else?
No comments. You were asking about Kroger Fuel Centers in Oakland County. I know of one in Springfield Township on Dixie Highway. There's a Kroger Fuel Center, and they get a lot of business because they have good prices. And if you have a Kroger card, you get even a better discount on gas.
That's great. Well, I guess in closing, I'm certainly pleased that the library millage passed, and I'd like to just make a comment for two of our city leaders, both now and the ones, we have an election coming up in a few months. My concerns there are I'd like to see emphasis placed on increasing our property value. That'd be nice. I'm tired of seeing my property value decline. And personally, my taxes have dropped $3,600 since 2007. That's due to declining property value. That's pretty extreme. And instead of all this myopic thrashing of budgets right and left, I'd like to see the time spent making things better for the citizens of this town by raising their property value, and also spend time on bringing more businesses into town to increase revenue. I'd like to see more emphasis on that, because building Troy is about keeping our neighborhoods strong and improving them, increasing our property value, and bringing more companies into town to keep us going forward. So that's my 2 cents, and whether that's political or not, don't care. Mr. Stratt, do you have a comment?
Well, I just wanted to ask Zach, is that going to be a part of the sign ordinance, going to be a part of the site plan approval process? Are we going to be looking at signage as well?
We require the signage be shown on there as part of the process now. The new ordinance, you're going to show, the new zoning ordinance has them showing signs on the plans, I think. I'm not entirely sure what the approach is going to be, where the sign ordinance is. I think the idea was to continue to keep the sign ordinance separate from the zoning ordinance. Otherwise, we would have incorporated it when we did the zoning ordinance rewrite. So it wouldn't necessarily be something where you would be yay or naying each individual sign as part of your site plan approval process. Probably not. But I don't know for sure, though, because honestly, Mr. Stratt, I'm not really involved in the rewrite of the sign ordinance, and it actually hasn't been rewritten yet. So I really don't know what the outcome of that will be. You could discuss that in a little more detail with Brent.
Most communities do incorporate that as a part of the site plan approval, though.
Some do, yeah. I would say probably, half the communities that I've worked in have it as part of the sign ordinance, is part of the actual, it's a chapter in the zoning ordinance, and so that's what it is. But it's sometimes you have to, there's a few benefits to either way. I'm sure that probably during this process, I or Brent or somebody could maybe do a little presentation on some of the benefits of having it be a separate ordinance, and then some of the benefits of having it be part of the zoning ordinance. A lot of it has to do with prosecution of nonconformities and all that kind of stuff. But it's interesting. It's going to be interesting to tackle the sign ordinance. So
yeah, it'll be a big project for sure. Well, with that, this meeting is adjourned.